Hi, this woman says, my name's Nicola and my company is Morecambe Bay Wills and Estates. And on International Women's Day, I wanted to talk to you about ourselves as women in our own right, but also as part of a unit, as a family, as a wife or a partner, a mother or a daughter. So women tend to be the natural protectors. It seems to be the way that how we're made. And I wanted to talk to you today about how you can be at the heart of protecting your unit and to gain peace of mind at the same time. And how are you going to do that? Well, by making sure that everything and all the right plans are in place for the future. We don't know what that future is going to might be, but we can make plans to protect it. And some of those plans include having wills and powers of attorney in place to make sure that you have the reassurance that you and your family and your business have done all you can to reduce the stress at some of what can be the worst times of your life. So this woman says, don't be a Gina, be a Kerry. So I'm going to tell you some stories about why, starting with my own and then stories about these and other women that I've met and what's happened to them to make them realise that simple actions now can make such a massive difference in the future. My own story starts with Jim, centres around Jim. Who's Jim? So Jim is or was my husband, and he lost his battle with cancer in 2018. Jim's the person who spurs me on. He makes me do what I do. He's the reason I decided to do it. And back in late 2017, I had an executive career. I was a management consultant. I was flying all around the world, advising companies. And Jim and I were working towards our plan of taking a whole year out in 2020 to travel around the world. So we were making some sacrifices, being apart, and in order to make sure that that plan came into place. Pandemic aside, obviously with 2020 and what it turned out to be, that would never going to happen. At the beginning of 2018, Jim was diagnosed with incurable pancreatic cancer. And so we knew we had limited time. I decided I was going to stop working so that we could make most of the time that we would have. For anybody who knows, pancreatic cancer is a terrible disease. It meant that Jim was ill most of the time, and he struggled both facing his diagnosis, but also the actions that we needed to take. A good example of that was even talking to the Department of Work and Pensions about benefits. So benefits you can fast track if you're terminal. Who wants to do that? Well, nobody wants to do that really, but I knew at least I could help him by talking to them, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it until or unless he was there to pass security and then hand the phone over to me so that I could talk to them. Because I didn't have a lasting power of attorney in place at the time, that was the only way that we could work. So on the days where he was just too ill to be bothered with anything like that, or the many times that he was in hospital, I couldn't help. You can imagine how that made me feel, not being able to help someone who really, really needs it. So when the doctors said to us, get your affairs in order, it's not something anybody wants to hear, but we decided that we should go ahead and do that. And we talked to a local solicitor. We were quoted well over £1,000 for updated wills for Jim and I and powers of attorney for Jim. We were lucky that we were financially in a position to be able to afford that, but I know that many, many people aren't. So we applied for powers of attorney. Those take 10 to 12 weeks. And in this situation, you don't have time. We worked through what changes we wanted to make to our wills. We'd made them 10 years previously, so we wanted to update them and make sure that the children had something now rather than wait an awful long time. But by the time our solicitor had drafted the new versions and we went back with some queries, she'd gone off on holiday to France and she had problems with her internet connection, so they never got finalised. And Jim deteriorated and lost his battle in August 2018. And that was before either the LPAs, the lasting powers of attorney, were registered or his updated will was signed. So not only did we have the emotions of losing him, we then found out that we were in a situation that was difficult to deal with his affairs and put in place what we knew he wanted. So I had to go to the trouble of getting his previous will amended. For those who don't know, you can actually do that if everybody agrees. I also had to go through hoops with HMRC. partly because Jim had amended his pension in the 2 years before he died. And we had no idea when we did this that he was ill, but I had to prove that he didn't know, because there are potentially ways of avoiding inheritance tax by moving pensions. So I had to prove to HMRC that he didn't do it for that reason. And that meant filling in, instead of a simple online form, it meant filling in over 80 pages of forms. So at a time when, you know, emotions are high, stress is high, this was exactly what I really didn't need. And then the dramas around digital stuff, not having access to Jim's photos or emails, because he changed his password and I'd got it wrong, and you know, my head wasn't in the right space. I couldn't remember what it was. I couldn't change the Sky package. I couldn't cancel his subscriptions and his emails. Even now, I'm really still struggling to cancel his Microsoft subscription. And you really don't need all of that at a time like that. I suppose the one saving grace was, because we'd had the conversations, I knew what he wanted for the kids, and I knew what his funeral wishes were, and I knew I was doing the right thing by him. And that's why I decided to do what I do now. I wanted to make sure that myself and other people in a similar situation never had to go through that sort of situation. So I decided to get retrained. I got all the qualifications that I need, and I set up my own company, Morecambe Bay Wills and Estates Limited. And I wanted to make sure that getting protection for you and for your family and making things easier when you lose someone is affordable and it's simple. So none of this £1,000 types of prices. But also what I wanted to do was do it in a charitable way. So when Jim and I were going through what we went through, we went to our local cancer care charity and we had therapy. I had counselling, for example. They gave Jim some relaxation techniques because, you know, before every scan, it was always a difficult time for him. So I decided I was going to support that. So I decided right from the very beginning that 5% of every invoice that I raise is going to go directly to cancer care. And that gives me, it drives me on. It sort of spurs me to do what I want, what I'm doing now. And all the time I'm thinking that, you know, Jim would be proud of the fact that I'm trying to help people, and I'm trying to make sure that other families like ours don't have to go through some of those similar things. So of course, in the last 2 years since that's happened, I've met lots and lots of women who've got their own stories to tell, and they keep inspiring me as well to do what I do. So I'm going to tell you some of their stories. I've changed their names and of course some of their circumstances, but these are real stories from the women I've met who are all just trying to protect their own unit. So first of all, I'll talk about Susan. I recently met Susan. She came to me to make a will because she wanted to make sure her family were provided for and didn't lose out in the way that she has. So Susan has motor neuron disease and it's progressing, and she's living on, she's having to rely on benefits for her housing and for her living expenses. And her dad passed away last year. Her dad made a will. And what he did was he did it by himself. He left all his estate to Susan and to her 2 sisters. But the problem for Susan is because she now has the inheritance, all of these Susan's benefits have stopped. So now she's having to use her inheritance for her day-to-day expenses instead of having the ability to pass it on to her children, which is what she wanted to do and what her father thought she was going to be able to do. So they'll never have the chance to have their granddad's inheritance. Not something that he envisaged, not something that he wanted. And a simple conversation with a professional could have helped him to put the money into a trust. And that would have meant that Susan's benefits were protected, the money was protected for the family. Something as simple as that, from a conversation that he could have had, would mean that Susan was in a better place and able to continue to protect her children and her family. I wanted to also share Elena's story. You might have seen this actually on the news. Her 97-year-old mum has dementia and she was in a care home, but because of COVID, she hadn't been able to see her mum for months, particularly face-to-face contact. And she realised that this was making her mum's dementia worse. So she decided, she took it upon herself that she was going to care for her mum herself. So off she goes to the care home. But when she arrived there to take her mum away, the police were called and she was arrested for assault. The harsh truth is that although the family had lasting powers of attorney to deal with the mother's financial affairs, they decided that they didn't need one for health and welfare. And what many people don't realise is that the health and welfare gives you overriding powers. So whilst Elena was simply just trying to protect her mum, she'd got no rights to do this because the legal duty of care for her mum was passed to the care home when she moved there. So having a lasting power of attorney would have helped Helena. She would have been able to make that decision for her mum and decide that she knew what was the right thing rather than the authorities. Someone else I want to talk to you about is Alice. So Alice came to me after her father had died, and we had a will. He hadn't updated it for a long time, and he'd named her sister Penny as an executor, as the sole executor. Unfortunately, Penny had fallen out with her father and with Alice a long time ago. But now, because she was the executor, Penny was the person responsible for arranging his funeral. So she arranged it and, from a spiteful position, left instructions for the funeral director not to tell anyone, especially Alice, when or where it was. So Alice was left not being able to say final goodbyes to her father. And if her father had updated his will after that family fallout, this would never have happened. And obviously, it's not what her father wanted. It's not what Alice wanted. But it just shows the importance of not only making a will, but actually making sure you keep it up to date based on the circumstances that you're facing at the moment. So let's talk about someone that you all probably know. I'm not going to change this name. So Kate Garraway, most of you will know Kate Garraway from Good Morning Britain and the awful situation she finds herself in with her husband still in hospital with COVID. She opened up recently on television about the financial mess she's in because she's trying to deal with his affairs. His name is on most of the bills, it's on most of the insurance policies, and she's not able to speak to anyone because she's not named on them. So she couldn't even deal with his car insurance company when the car was stolen from his home by some heartless thugs from outside of their home. And so not only is she having to deal with the stress of her husband being ill and obviously everything that her children are going through, she can't even deal with the organisations that are there to help to protect her family, particularly insurance. So if she'd have had a financial power of attorney in place, if they'd have had them, even though they're young, many people think you don't need a power of attorney until you're old, you're facing dementia, for example. This just shows that you have no idea what's around the corner. None of the family would have anticipated finding themselves in this situation. And it really just shows how important it is to plan ahead just in case. So Kate's got enough on her plate without all of this worry and this stress, and a simple power of attorney already in place would have prevented that. The only option she has now is to go through deputyship, and that's go through the courts of protection, which will cost £4,000 and then ongoing fees, and can take months. 9 months is the average at the moment. So that's the power of a power of attorney. And then the final person that I wanted to, sorry, not the final, there is one more actually. I want to talk to you about Gina. So Gina's dad passed away when she was young, and he left everything to her mum and then to Gina and her brother. Her mum updated her own will after she'd lost her husband and just made sure that the only beneficiaries were Gina and her brother. However, Gina's mum married several years later, but she didn't know that marriage revokes your will. So when she passed away, her new husband was entitled to everything, well, the vast majority of her estate. And that left Gina and her brother with only a very, very small part of what both the parents had worked so hard for. So if mum and dad had used a simple trust in their wills, it could have been avoided. They could have left Gina and her brother potentially half of the house, for example, with a right to live there for her mum. And then if her mum had known that marriage revokes a will, she could have altered her will and at least left some provision, some bigger provision, instead of it all going to her new husband. And then finally, I wanted to talk to you about Hannah. Well, actually, it's not about Hannah. It's actually about Hannah's friend, Jill. But Hannah came to me recently because she wanted to protect her children if anything happened to her and her partner, because she'd seen what her friend Jill had gone through. Jill had lost both of her parents when she was only 12. Absolute tragedy for a child at that age. And the last thing you want for a child at that age is uncertainty, is stress, is worry, is emotions, and wondering what's going to happen to them. But because Jill's parents hadn't made a will, they hadn't named legal guardians. So both sides of the family, both her father's side and her mother's side, decided they both wanted to look after Jill and the two sisters, but none of them had the legal right to do so because they weren't named as legal guardians. So what followed was a bitter dispute, and that led to all three girls being placed temporarily in care while the courts decided what was going to happen. So you can imagine Gina has now had a situation where her and her sisters have all been in care, and that could have absolutely been avoided. I mean, the reality is that social workers nowadays will at least try and keep the girls together to get with a temporary family guardian, but that might not be the guardian that ends up being the permanent guardian. So those girls may have gone to live with someone and then had to up sticks and go and live with someone else when the courts finally made those decisions. I mean, Hannah told me that she couldn't bear thinking about her children losing her and their dad, but making a will and thinking that they would be protected would make it much, much easier for her to deal with. So it's not a nice thing to think about. And it's actually the reason that many parents don't make a will. And my advice is, your children are, you might have nothing. You may not have a house, you may not have a big bank account, but your children are actually your most important assets. And a simple statement in your will avoid all of that if anything does happen to you. So, that's the ultimate way of protecting your children. So obviously all of these stories are about things that go wrong. And I don't want to focus on the things that go wrong, but I want to give you some real life stories of, we all know we need to make a will. We all know we should do it. But maybe one of those stories might have prompted something in you that says, actually, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be a Gina. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the people that I have made, some stories of the women that I have met, and those that have taken steps to protect their unit. And theirs will be the stories that we all want to tell in the future. And it's a terrible thing to think about, but here are some of the phrases that women use after making their wills or powers of attorney. And I haven't changed any names here for information. So Nick said, I got a will to secure my son's future and I'm glad I did it. Thank you very much for helping me. And Karen said, making a will's really emotive and it can churn up all sorts of feelings. You really can't afford not to have one, and making a will is so easy with Morecambe wills. It was great to hear from Kerry, because Kerry has now said, I feel at ease knowing that everything's in place if anything should happen. And from Lisa said, it's something we've put off for years because we thought it might be complex and painfully filled with legal jargon, but it was simple, it was painless, and it was really quick, and I don't know why I didn't sort it earlier. And Jodie told me, I feel a reassuring sense of ease now that something so important is complete. And finally, Ruth said, I knew it would be emotional, and it's not something that people look forward to doing, but I really, really would urge others to consider getting it done. It's important, and the peace of mind is even more important. So who would you rather be? Would you rather be a Susan, an Elena, an Alice, a Kate, a Jill? Or would you rather be a Nick, a Karen, a Kerry, a Lisa, a Jodie, or a Ruth? I hope that telling my story and the story of other women was useful for you. And that's why this woman says, it isn't just for you, it's for those around you. So don't put off what you know you should do. Protect your unit in 2021. If you want more information, you can have a free, no pressure chat about how you can protect your own unit. Just send me a message. And if you'd like to ask some more questions, I'm going to be doing a live Q&A session next week. It's at 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 18th of March, over on my Facebook page. Just search for Morecambe Bay Wills and Estates. If you like the page, you'll get a reminder about it. So thanks very much for listening, and happy International Women's Day.